I don't have time to be someone's priority when my daughter will always be mine." Those words hung in the air of the small office, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the desk between them. If you've ever had to choose between your heart and your responsibilities, this story might just resonate with you. Before we dive deeper into James's journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the soul and remind us of what truly matters in life. James Morgan stared at his boss, Catherine Wells, the woman who had just asked him the question he'd been dodging for months from coworkers and friends alike. At 42, with tired eyes that had seen too many sleepless nights and a smile that appeared less frequently than it once did, James wasn't what most would consider a catch. But Catherine saw something in him that others missed, a depth of character forged through hardship, a quiet strength that commanded respect without demanding it. The office around them was quiet, most employees having left for the day. Only the distant hum of the cleaning crew's vacuum broke the silence that followed James's answer. Catherine's expression shifted from curiosity to something more complex, surprise, understanding, and a flash of pain. "Tell me about her," Catherine said softly, leaning back in her chair, her quarterly review notes forgotten on the desk between them. James hesitated, his weathered hands fidgeting with his watch, a habit he'd developed in the years since becoming a single parent. He rarely spoke about his personal life at work, maintaining a careful boundary between his professional persona and the man who read bedtime stories and checked for monsters under the bed. "Lily is 12, he finally said, his voice softening at the mention of his daughter's name. "She's smart, too smart sometimes. Loves science and painting. Terrible at keeping her room clean." A small smile tugged at his lips. "She's all I have left of her mother." Catherine nodded, encouraging him to continue, though she already knew parts of the story. Office gossip had filled in some blanks, how James's wife, Elena, had died from complications during childbirth, how he'd thrown himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to his work as the company's lead project manager. "After Elena died, I made a promise," James continued, his voice steady but quiet. "I promised that Lily would never feel like she wasn't enough. That she would never question where she stood in my life." The afternoon light caught the silver strands in his dark hair, premature gray that had appeared in the years of raising a child alone, working full-time, and trying to be both mother and father to a little girl who had her mother's eyes and curious spirit. "Dating means dividing my attention," he explained. "It means someone else's needs, someone else's expectations. Right now, between work and Lily, I barely have enough of myself to go around." Catherine's eyes softened. As his boss for 3 years, she'd watched James turn down company happy hours, decline weekend team-building retreats, and rearrange his schedule countless times for parent-teacher conferences and dance recitals. His dedication was admirable, but she'd also seen the toll it took, the loneliness that sometimes shadowed his face when he thought no one was looking. "James," she said gently, "I'm asking as your friend, not your boss. Don't you ever get lonely?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been for a Friday afternoon performance review that had veered dramatically off course. James looked out the window at the city skyline, the buildings catching the golden light of approaching sunset. "Lonely?" he repeated, as if testing the word. "Sometimes. But loneliness is simpler than guilt." He turned back to Catherine, his expression open in a way she rarely saw during work hours. "The first time I considered dating again, Lily was 7. I met someone at a conference, another single parent who understood the balancing act. We went out twice." His eyes clouded with the memory. "The second night, I came home later than I promised. The babysitter said Lily had waited up as long as she could. I found her asleep on the couch, still wearing her school clothes, a drawing clutched in her hand." James paused, swallowing hard. It was a picture of the three of us, me, her, and her mother. Not the woman I'd been with that night, but Elena. The mother she'd never known except through photos and my stories. Catherine felt her throat tighten. When she woke up, she asked me if I was going to forget her mom now. If we were going to be a different family. James shook his head. She was trying so hard to be brave about it, to be grown up. But she was terrified of losing the connection to the mother she never had. He straightened in his chair, his professional demeanor slipping back into place like armor. So I made a choice. Dating, relationships, they could wait. Lily couldn't. She gets one childhood. One chance to grow up feeling secure and loved. I won't compromise that, not even to ease my own loneliness. Catherine nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. What had begun as casual curiosity, perhaps even personal interest, had revealed something far more profound about the quiet man who led her project teams with such steady competence. That's quite a sacrifice, she said finally. James shrugged, a small smile touching his lips. Is it a sacrifice to prioritize what matters most? Lily isn't a burden. She's the best part of my life. The conversation might have ended there, a moment of unexpected vulnerability in an otherwise ordinary workday, but Catherine wasn't finished. Something about James's certainty troubled her. What about Lily? She asked. Doesn't she deserve to see her father happy? To learn that love can grow and change, that hearts have room for more than one person? The question caught James off guard. In all his years of deflecting well-meaning suggestions about dating apps and blind dates, no one had ever framed it quite that way, as something he might owe his daughter rather than himself. I am happy, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Catherine leaned forward, her professional reserve momentarily forgotten. James, I've seen how you are with Lily when she visits the office. You're an incredible father. But children grow up watching us. They learn how to live by seeing how we live. James stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. What if, Catherine continued carefully, by protecting Lily from any change, you're actually teaching her that love is finite? That relationships are too fragile to risk? The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of realization spreading across James's face. He'd been so focused on what he thought Lily needed that he hadn't considered what she might be learning from his choices. I never thought of it that way, he admitted quietly. Catherine smiled gently. Maybe it's time you did. The conversation shifted then, back to performance metrics and project timelines, but something had changed between them, a new understanding, a glimpse behind the professional facades they both maintained. As James gathered his things to leave, Catherine spoke again. For what it's worth, I think the right person would understand your priorities. They wouldn't ask you to choose. James paused at the door, looking back at the woman who was both his boss and, he realized, perhaps his friend. Maybe, he conceded. But they'd have to be pretty extraordinary. Catherine's smile held something he couldn't quite read. Some people are. The weekend passed in its usual rhythm of grocery shopping, laundry, and Lily's soccer game. James found himself watching his daughter more closely than usual, noticing the subtle signs of the teenager she was becoming, the way she checked her phone more frequently, how she'd started caring about her hair, the new vocabulary she brought home from school. Sunday evening found them in their familiar positions. Lily sprawled on the living room floor with her science project materials scattered around her, James at the kitchen table with his laptop, close enough to help but giving her the independence she increasingly craved. Dad? Lily's voice broke the comfortable silence. Can I ask you something? James looked up from his email. Always. Lily sat up, cross-legged among her poster boards and markers. At 12, she was at that in-between stage, still his little girl in so many ways, but with glimpses of the young woman she would become appearing more frequently. Why don't you ever date anyone? The question knocked the air from his lungs. Had she somehow sensed his conversation with Catherine? Or was this just the uncanny timing that children seem to possess? That's a pretty big question, he managed, closing his laptop. What makes you ask? Lily shrugged, her attention seemingly focused on the marker in her hand. Mia's dad got remarried last year. And Emma's mom has a boyfriend now. She looked up at him, her eyes, so like Elena's, serious and searching. But you're always just, alone. James moved to the floor, sitting beside his daughter among the science project debris. I'm not alone, he said gently. I have you. Lily rolled her eyes in that preteen way that simultaneously amused and terrified him. That's not the same, Dad. I'm your kid. Don't you want, like, a grown-up person? Someone to talk to and stuff? I talk to you, he said, nudging her shoulder playfully. Dad. Her voice held that note of exasperation that had become more common lately. I'm serious. Are you not dating because of me? Because you think I'd be upset? The directness of the question stunned him. When had his little girl become so perceptive? So concerned about his happiness? It's complicated, Lily Pad, he said, using the nickname she'd recently declared herself too old for but secretly still loved. After your mom died, you became my whole world. I wanted to make sure you always knew how important you are to me. Lily was quiet for a moment, fidgeting with a strand of her dark hair. I know I'm important to you, Dad. You show me that every day. She looked up at him, her expression suddenly vulnerable. But sometimes I worry about you. Like, what happens when I grow up and go to college? You'll be all alone. James felt his throat tighten. How had he missed this? While he'd been protecting her from potential hurt, she'd been worrying about him. Is that what you're concerned about? That I'll be lonely when you're grown? Lily nodded. And also. She hesitated, then pushed forward with the courage he'd always admired in her. I wonder what it would be like to have someone else in our family. Not to replace Mom, she added quickly, but just to make our circle bigger. James wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. When did you get so wise, huh? She leaned against him, still small enough to fit perfectly under his arm. I get it from my dad, she said with a small smile. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, James found himself standing in front of the living room bookshelf, looking at the framed photos that chronicled their life together. Elena's face smiled out from several, their wedding day, a hiking trip they'd taken when she was 4 months pregnant, radiant with excitement for the future they'd planned. What would you think, Elle? He whispered to the empty room. Have I been getting it all wrong? The house offered no answer, just the familiar creaks and hums of the home they'd bought together, planning for a family that had turned out so differently than they'd imagined. James picked up his phone, scrolling to Catherine's contact information. His thumb hovered over her number for a long moment before he set the phone down again. Whatever was happening, this shift in his thinking, this opening of possibilities, it needed more time. More thought. But for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where Lily wasn't the only person who held space in his heart. One where he might find room for his own happiness without diminishing his daughter's. Monday morning arrived with its usual rush of lunch packing, hair braiding, and the race to catch the school bus. James dropped Lily off with a hug in her forgotten science project, then headed to the office, his mind still churning with the weekend's revelations. He was so distracted that he nearly collided with Catherine in the hallway outside the conference room. Whoa, she said, steadying him with a hand on his arm. Heavy thoughts for a Monday morning? James looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Catherine Wells, his boss for 3 years. Brilliant, demanding but fair, with a dry sense of humor that made even the most tedious meetings bearable. She'd always been attractive in an objective sense, but he'd never allowed himself to notice the warm brown of her eyes or the way her smile transformed her professional demeanor into something softer, more approachable. James, she prompted, her expression shifting to concern. Everything okay? He nodded, suddenly aware that they were standing in the middle of the hallway with curious colleagues passing by. Yes, sorry. Just, a lot on my mind. Lily asked me some unexpected questions this weekend. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. Ah. The joys of parenting a preteen. Want to talk about it over coffee? I have about 20 minutes before my next meeting. The company cafe was quiet at this hour, most employees already settled at their desks. James and Catherine found a corner table, away from the few other early coffee seekers. So, Catherine said, wrapping her hands around her mug. What did Lily want to know? Please tell me it wasn't the birds and bees conversation. I'm not sure I've had enough coffee to hear about that particular parenting milestone. James laughed, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. No, nothing like that. Though I'm sure that's coming soon enough. He took a breath. She asked me why I don't date. If it was because of her. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. Quite the coincidence, given our conversation Friday. That's what I thought, James agreed. But it gets more surprising. She wasn't upset by the idea at all. In fact, she was worried about me being lonely when she grows up. A smile spread across Catherine's face. Smart kid. Too smart sometimes, James said, shaking his head with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. She said she wonders what it would be like to make our circle bigger. Those were her exact words. Catherine set her coffee down, her expression thoughtful. Out of the mouths of babes, she said softly. So what did you tell her? James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Catherine had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. I didn't really give her an answer. I was too surprised. But it's made me think that maybe I've been using her as an excuse. An excuse? To avoid risking my heart again, he admitted, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so many years of silence on the subject. Elena and I were high school sweethearts. I've never really dated as an adult. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Catherine's eyes held his, steady and warm. Most people start with dinner, she said, a hint of teasing in her voice. James felt a flush creep up his neck. Was she suggesting? No, surely not. She was his boss, for one thing. And for another, a woman like Catherine, accomplished, beautiful, confident, could have her pick of men who weren't emotional works in progress with preteen daughters and mortgages and gray hair creeping in at the temples. I should probably start with something less intimidating, he said, trying to keep his tone light. Like skydiving or swimming with sharks. Catherine laughed, the sound drawing glances from nearby tables. Dating isn't combat, James. Though I'll admit, it can feel that way sometimes. Their coffee break ended too soon, both pulled back to the reality of Monday meetings and deadlines. But as they walked back to their respective offices, Catherine paused. For what it's worth, she said, her voice professional but her eyes holding something warmer, I think Lily's right. You deserve to be happy, James. And any woman would be lucky to be part of your circle. Before he could respond, she was gone, heels clicking efficiently down the hallway toward the executive suite, leaving James with the distinct feeling that something important had just happened, though he couldn't quite define what. The week progressed with its usual rhythm of work deadlines and parenting responsibilities. James found himself watching Catherine in meetings, noticing things he'd overlooked before, her quick mind, her skill at managing difficult personalities, the way she always made time to acknowledge good work from every level of the company. By Friday, he'd made a decision. It was terrifying and possibly foolish, but Lily's words kept echoing in his mind, make our circle bigger. Maybe it was time to try. He waited until the office had mostly emptied for the weekend, then made his way to Catherine's office. Her assistant had already left, but light spilled from under her door. Catherine was known for working late, especially before big presentations like the one scheduled for Monday. James knocked softly, his heart hammering in his chest like a teenager's. Come in, Catherine called, her voice distracted. She looked up from her computer as he entered, surprise and something else flickering across her face. James. Did we have a meeting scheduled? No, he said, closing the door behind him. This